Welcome back to the second hour of Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I am your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really happy to have back with me Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Daniel's been in the middle of a move, and it's quite an ordeal. He's got a family of a couple of children, and so moving all the way from Washington to Texas is sort of taking him out of commission here a little bit. And I didn't want to keep bugging him to come on the show as much as I love to talk to Daniel, but now he is settling in, so welcome, Daniel. It's good to have you back.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to be back with you again.
Good to talk to you as always. How's that move going? Are you pretty well settled in down there in Texas, in the mosquito country?
Well, we got a lot of boxes still, but we're getting settled in with the Institute. We have we actually have a new office. We're going to be located right next to Dr. Paul's Free Foundation, which is our parent organization anyway. We're going to be very close to the Ron Paul Channel studio, and most importantly, just very close to Ron Paul himself. And it's just such a treat to now be down here after working for a year in the horrible D.C. area, and to be here with our CEO and founder. It's just terrific.
Well, you've moved from the belly of the beast to a kinder, gentler, free market orientation down there for sure, being next to Dr. Paul. So I'm sure the logistics of the things you were just talking about will work out very well for the Institute as well.
I was just going to say, I was sort of hoping that some conspiracy writer will write something harrowing about this suspicious island freedom opening up in South Texas, and heard about the coctopus. Someone talk about the Paulopus or something.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And of course, we can't have too much freedom. That's a bad thing. So we gotta watch these people, because we know that people are too stupid to be free. I mean, that's the idea that you get from the I think the idea that you get from the mainstream media to a great extent, without them saying that, and also from the elite universities. Now that we have a PhD standard, that monetary standard, instead of a gold standard, as James Grant likes to say. Well, anyway, turning more to geopolitics, which is what we really like to talk to you most about, because that is what you specialize in. I saw an article that you wrote on Eric Cantor. He is a guy that just lost to an unknown candidate, a more populist Tea Party type. And yet Cantor hasn't gone away. He's more active than ever, and he's really promoting this militaristic view, especially in the Middle East, isn't he? Can you comment a little bit on the article that you just wrote?
Sure. Well, he's always done this, and he's always been extremely partisan when it comes to Middle East politics. He's been completely, unabashedly, blindly pro-right-wing in Israel. To the point where a lot of people said he alienated a lot of his constituents.
Yeah.
And he's from a largely rural district in Virginia, and he's so obsessed with politics thousands of miles away that the people locally were, where's Eric? Where's Eric?
Yeah.
And so this stunning loss, and I think it's been since the late 19th century that a sitting House Majority Leader lost a primary. This stunning defeat really essentially ends his political career, or it should. But he's, as I wrote in this little piece last night, he's not going quietly. He released a press release yesterday heralding the passage of this very, very one-sided resolution. And as we know, there's a terrible tragedy going on in Gaza right now on both sides. Unfortunately, the Israeli military is really bombing it back into the Stone Age. I think about 170-some people, of which 77% are civilians, have been killed. And on the other side, Hamas is wantonly firing rockets into Israel, which is also a terrible thing, thing. And I could say, fortunately, Hamas is so primitive that these rockets have done very little damage and have killed no one. But you do have kind of a David and Goliath, and here's Cantor saying that Israel needs to go. And you ask, well, why do we care? Well, the reason why it's disturbing for us as non-interventionists is that it is American-made F-16s, American-made weapons, and unfortunately we're forced to finance it too with our military aid to Israel. So we incur more enmity from people in the region, more people are angry with us, and it doesn't make Israel any safer either to encourage them to do something that's just fanning the flames.
Yeah. Well, the old idea, the argument that Ron Paul made when he ran for president, the reason they're over here is because we're over there. I don't know why that's so difficult for people to grasp, but it seems to be something that most people just eliminate from their minds as a possibility. Why we have to gear up our own intelligence domestically here, and have to have to go through what we have to go through airports, and it's just incredible. But in any event, so what? Just speculate a little bit. What might motivate Cantor? I mean, his political career is done, but perhaps not his lobbying career, Daniel.
No, that's a good point. Actually, he may stand to make a lot more money as a lobbyist.
Right, now that he has the name, and he can open doors in Congress, can get in to see people, can bring in the big money to their campaigns. Eric Cantor might now be ready to get really rich.
It could be, but there's something intoxicating about being a sitting House member, and I suspect as rich as he gets, he'll always have a tear in his eye for the time that he had the real power. We saw this with people like Tom DeLay who fell from grace. It's something about being in the center of that power that, I remember from my time on the Hill, you'd see members who are so aged and infirm that they have to be wheeled down there to vote. At death's door, they're still grasping at that ring. So yeah. He'll probably get rich, but he probably won't be as happy as he's been.
Well, the intoxication of power, I guess, which I think is very evil. But and I think our founding fathers believed that too, which is why they didn't want government to be so important, and to they were supposed to be serving us instead of us serving them. But anyway, getting off topic a little bit, you talked about bombing those folks over in the Gaza, I guess, into the Stone Age. What about Brzezinski? You wrote another article. Brzezinski is talking about ethnic cleansing of Eastern Russians, or at least that's maybe not. He's not putting it in those words, I'm sure. But is there some reason to be concerned? That's his mindset.
Well, that is his mindset, and he wrote this famous book about the world, the global chessboard, and that's how he sees the world. He sees the world as a global chessboard where America, being the number one power, gets to move things around. And I think that's a very dangerous mentality. But what I wrote was based on a speech that he gave at the Wilson Center, I think late last month, if I'm not mistaken. And his point was that the U.S. needs to get much more active in arming the government in Kiev and encourage them to go after the people in eastern Ukraine who they don't want to be part of Ukraine anymore after the U.S.-sponsored coup in Kiev. And they've been fighting. They've set up their own, they call it a self-defense organization. And what Brzezinski said that I picked out and found very suspicious was that we shouldn't arm them with planes and things of this nature because there's no way they could to defeat the Russian military, which is true. He says we need to train the regime in Kiev to do urban warfare. And if you think about what urban warfare is, it is a way of destabilizing cities and villages, which is exactly what the Kiev Air Force is doing. I mean, they're bombing Lugansk and villages around there. They're bombing civilian homes, and it terrorizes people. There have been, I think, close to 200,000 people from that area have fled as refugees into Russia because, who wants to stick around in that situation?
Sure.
So what you'll have is a de facto emptying of eastern Ukraine of all of its inhabitants, and then you can move people in from the west. You can do a number of things. There's also in that part of Ukraine, it's referred to as being impoverished, but in fact there is an enormous, from what I've read, an enormous amount of resources to be fracked. There's trapped natural gas, and so that's why we see people like Vice President Biden's son named to the board of the largest energy producer in Ukraine. There is a large amount of untapped resources in the East. And if you can get rid of these malcontents who pose a threat to it, then bingo, you're rich.
Well, it's hard for me to see Putin just standing idly by.
That may be, but Putin is not the he's not the radical person that he's claimed to be. I mean, he's had plenty of provocations in eastern Ukraine. He's done nothing. In fact, everything he's done is what he's been told to do by the West. He's pulled back his troops from his own territory. So I think I don't see him doing anything rash unless it really comes to it. And we've seen several provocations, and they've increased over the past couple of weeks, where the Kiev forces have fired into Russia. As a matter of fact, a couple of days ago, they fired into a Russian village and killed a Russian citizen.
Huh.
So these sorts of things I think, are an attempt to draw Russia into it, because that would keep the U.S. and especially the Europeans who are wavering, that would keep them interested in what's happening in Ukraine. You know, I think the U.S. and the EU now have a hangover. They spent all night drinking, i.e. supporting this coup, and they woke up the next morning thinking, good Lord, what were we thinking? Now, this place is an economic disaster. It's a disaster with regard to the different ethnic groups or different linguistic groups, you know, and so I think these provocations are an attempt to get them interested again, but they're enormously dangerous.
You know, I'm just wondering, as you're talking about destabilization, it seems to me that's what we're doing in the entire Middle East, Daniel. It seems like everywhere we go, things are less stable than they were before we entered, whether it's Iraq or Syria, you know, throughout the Middle East and Afghanistan. It just seems to me, is this the modus operandi, to destabilize, to divide and conquer, to damage and just totally destroy and then run over them and take them over? Is this the policy?
You know, I go back and forth between thinking that is the policy, and it is a pretty good policy, actually, if that's what they want to do. If you can atomize people, if you can turn neighbor against neighbor, alles gegen alles, then you can conquer and control. That's one thing. But if you take it as face value that the U.S. is trying to pursue democratic values and all the things that they tell us, then that, if anything, screams to the high heavens of the failures of interventionism, because, as you say, there simply are no successes to point out. And you know, now the U.S. is facing in Syria, for example, the prospect of arming, or continue to arm, with the $500 million the president requested, the same people they're fighting in Iraq, who threatened to make Baghdad fall.
Yeah.
So the folly is, I mean, however you look at it, both of those things are bad.
Yeah. It just seems to be no rhyme or reason to our policy, and you know, we support people that turn out. You know, we're supposedly fighting Al Qaeda, and then we're supporting people and giving arms to people that turn out to be a branch of Al Qaeda. And I mean, it just seems so. If the intent is to defend the United States, if the intent of our Defense Department is to make the United States stronger and to trade and to have good economic relations around the world, we're certainly not heading in that direction. If anything, Daniel, from what I'm reading, a lot of the trade has already been disrupted. Agricultural products, for example, from the Ukraine is not getting out, and I'm told that there's some disruptions of trade in Europe as well, because of, or in the Middle East as well, because of problematic issues there. So it's just, to me, it's just seems like divide and conquer. You know, just destroy and conquer. It's just horrible. I think it certainly, for me, morally seems so decrepit and wrong. Another article that appeared in today's Financial Times: NATO leaders plot cyber fight back after Russian propaganda coup. And this is an article in which really, you know, they're pointing to Russia as if Russia is really winning a propaganda battle, and as if there's no propaganda from the West side at all. Have you seen this article?
I have, Jay, and it's really a fascinating article on so many levels. You know, it's the first thing that struck me, and I mean, let's look at the bête noire for the U.S. is the Russian channel RT,
uh-huh.
24-hour news channel that's broadcast widely, whose reach and popularity is growing exponentially. And we've seen even the Secretary of State attacking this station. So
mm-hmm.
this really is what they're talking about, the success of RT.
Mm-hmm.
But what's so fascinating reading the article and reading the quotes from these NATO guys is that they look at everything as a war.
Uh-huh.
Now, this is a propaganda war.
Mm-hmm.
And they have all of their cyber war specialists and cyber defense specialists going on about, we've got to fight this war better. And the reality is RT simply provides a better product. They deliver interesting information that you don't see on the mainstream news.
Absolutely.
If you look at it, I mean, there are a lot of things. I don't watch it all the time, but there are a lot of things on it I think are goofy, like everywhere else. But where else do you see people like Ron Paul being regularly interviewed, Lou Rockwell, other people who the mainstream media would like to avoid? They're given a platform there, and it's interesting. People are sick of the mainstream. Look at the numbers of people. Look at the recent polls about how people have just simply turned off the mainstream news. So they're delivering a better product, and NATO doesn't know what to do about it. And it's really funny. As I read this, I was thinking that this very statue-like response to it. NATO reminds me of Brezhnev in his last years. You know? If you remember, they kept pumping him full of vitamins and probably caffeine and amphetamines or something just to make him look alive, and he was essentially dead for several years. But he's pumped full of artificial things to make him look alive, and that reminds me of what NATO looks like right now. You know, they are talking about this sort of we need to have a top-down news response to RT and all of these Russian propaganda outlets. But the fact of the matter is, every time they do this, because it's top-down, because it's all centralized, the stuff they produce is horrible and boring. I mean, who reads VOA? Who watches RFE? All of these U.S. and NATO-funded propaganda outlets are just horribly boring, and RT is interesting. And it does, again, back to the same analogy, it reminds me of the late USSR, when the center could no longer hold, because the captive peoples of the USSR were interested in pop culture from the West. They were interested in blue jeans. These things were interesting to them, and their own government was doing nothing but producing, 5-year plan reports and agricultural reports, and the wooden language. And that's unfortunately the position that now NATO is in. They're producing the wooden language, and Russia, with things like RT, is producing actually something kind of interesting.
You know, Daniel, the article that I referred to here, it's the question is posed: how do you counter Russian propaganda? And my first thought was, well, maybe you tell the truth, or maybe you allow the truth to be told and investigate the truth. You were saying NATO and the leaders basically they say, how do we counter this propaganda war? Well, I think how you do it is basically let's examine what RT is saying. Let's think about it. And is it credible or not? And and that's to me what RT provides. And I love the station. I listen to it when I don't have it. We can't get it on Verizon. I can get it on Time Warner if that was my service here. It is available on a lot of cable networks around the state. Can you get it down in Texas?
I to be honest, I actually watch it online mostly.
Okay.
I don't watch a lot of TV, but I do watch it online.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's very interesting. You mentioned Voice of America and RFT and some of those. Well, I remember during the Cold War, clearly it seemed to me. Now I'm sure that our propaganda machine already had me figured, had me duped. But basically, Daniel, I thought, this is really interesting because I think what the Russians are doing with RT is probably is a propaganda instrument for Russia. But it's propaganda just like we exposed a lot of the horrible things in Russia, just as I think RT is doing with respect to the NATO alliances as well. Now, just another thing or two, another very interesting article that I picked up in the Financial Times today. Eastern Bloc opposes Italian European Union post, and this is a story about a leader who was from Italy, who was supposed to be taking a leading role in the EU, is now at the last minute being opposed by Eastern Bloc countries, or let's say Eastern European countries that are members of NATO, or at least opposed to Russia. And they're concerned that Italy is becoming too friendly with Russia. There was it was an invitation to have Russia visit Italy, and along with some Asian leaders. So obviously somebody's very uncomfortable. It's been my impression, Daniel. You could tell me if you agree with this, but generally the people I meet up with here in New York that are from Eastern Europe are the most strident anti-Russians. and the people from Western Europe tend to be more balanced about it. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, but I think you can divide it even further because, and I saw the article you're talking about, and what it is just a very small section of the former East. You know, this is Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland, and these are the most strident anti-Russia countries. And you know, I don't want to demean them, but to be quite frank, what's happened is they're now able to be the big man on the block because they have NATO behind them.
Yeah.
And they're just obsessed with refighting the Cold War. You know, they want to refight it. People like Radek Sikorski in Poland, who's obsessed with the U.S. and NATO getting more and more aggressive toward Russia. And as you point out, you know, Italy is taking over the presidency of the EU now from the UK, and this is an Italian woman who's up for Catherine Ashton's job as the EU foreign policy chief. Interesting. One interesting thing, as an aside, is that all of these are appointed posts. You know, democracy. None of these people are elected.
Yeah.
But they're furious because, as you point out, they actually want to invite Russia to an EU and Asian leaders summit in Milan. As if that's, you know, somehow, you know, you can't invite, you know, the largest country on earth, which is a significant economic power. You can't even invite them. What is interesting, though, is that if you put this small group aside, it gets more interesting because a country like Hungary, which is headed by a center-right party, Fidesz, that has long been despised in Washington, and in reality, Washington's very negative behavior toward this political party has led it to be more open to Russia and to sort of playing a pivoting role in the region. So there is quite a bit of diversity, but you have these hardcore Baltics and Poland who are just obsessed with it.
Yeah, and of course NATO really likes that. NATO, you know, in terms of consolidating its power, it's using those countries probably as a means to expand its influence, I suppose, as much as possible politically. Well, anyway, very interesting. But it seems to me there's a growing number of issues that are taking place now that are maybe angering is too strong a word. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But irritating, at least Europe, Western Europe. You know, we see the Germany being spied on and sending a CIA agent out of the country. France is has been angered by various sanctions and getting in the way of their trade with Russia. Interesting little story I came upon. Portugal is investigating a possible CIA assassination of their beloved leader back in 1980 that has to do with the Iran-Contra scam issue going way back. I think there just seems to be growing discontent in Europe, perhaps because they sort of see the United States as getting in the way of their economic progress in some ways with all these sanctions. The bankers are unhappy about it as well. So I just wonder if there may not be some blowback here, and that leads me to another article you brought to my attention by Paul Martin Foss, who I met in Ron Paul's office a few years back. I guess he's formed an institute as well now, and he's written an article. Maybe you could just comment on it briefly. How to Lose Friends and Make People Hate You, which seems to be what the United States is doing by strong-arming and ramrodding sanctions and so forth through everywhere.
Sure, yeah. Actually, I worked with Paul Martin for a number of years in Dr. Paul's office, and I think he's in the process, or he's just opened the doors for his new Carl Menger Center for the Study of Money and Banking. He was Dr. Paul's financial services aide, so it's nice that Paul Martin is doing this. Pardon me. And the first thing I've seen from him in this new institute is, as you point out, a quite interesting article because it explores an area that I know you and I are both very interested in, which is the nexus between the financial system, the money system, the banking system, and foreign policy.
Yeah.
And so that really is, I think, a key issue, this nexus. But Paul Martin writes about how there is a blowback from the U.S. heavy-handed treatment of these foreign banks. You know, we know the BNP Paribas sanction where the U.S. is demanding billions of dollars. because this French bank had the audacity to do business with Iran and Sudan.
Yeah.
You know, how dare they? So everyone else in the world has to follow American laws that say that you have to sanction these countries, you can't do business with them, and if you do, you get cut off from doing business in the dollar.
Yeah.
And what Martin points out is this is all made possible by the U.S. Monetary system, where dollars are printed, there's nothing to back them, and the dollar is a reserve currency of the world. So the U.S. uses this to bully other countries, to force them to abide by its sanctions on this or that leader of the day. And what Paul Martin points out is that by punching these countries repeatedly in the face, they're being forced to start thinking about alternatives to the dollar as the world's currency. So implied is certainly that the U.S. I should say the elites who control the U.S. are in the process of killing the goose who lays the golden eggs.
Mm-hmm. Well, that certainly is a thesis that Jim Rickards has talked about on this show and elsewhere, for sure. We are creating money out of thin air, and then we tell people, try to force them to use those worthless units of currency, which are really a legalized way of stealing from people that create wealth. And I think foreign countries are starting to catch on to that. I mean, I think they've caught on to it for a long time, but how do they unwind and how do they get out of this system? And we see increasingly a move on the part of the BRIC countries, for example, to set up their own trading institutions on the currency, on the oil markets, on the gold and precious metals markets. And we talked to David Jensen, who's going to be with me after the break here. But David has pointed out how in Shanghai, I believe it is, that they are requiring people to deposit the metal before they can trade. And the big issue here is that the large banks, the large bullion banks, are essentially trading, using it as a casino, the futures markets as a casino, to print or to go on both sides of the markets. And you'll see the gold price taking a really big hit all of a sudden, and it's J.P. Morgan or one of the big guys going in with massive amounts of firepower. But they play both sides of the market, and they manipulate it up and down, and they front run, and all of that sort of thing seems to be what's going on. And so the BRIC countries are sort of more than annoyed by it, but they're talking about setting up their own financial institutions to get around the dollar that you're talking about. So this is, I think, very, very important. I'm really glad you mentioned Paul Martin Foss. I want to try to get in touch with him sometime in the near future, Daniel, and talk to him as well, because I think that's very valuable, and I can see some good value there between what you're doing with the more detailed political stuff that goes on and what Paul Martin is doing, combining that with the financial markets. So
exactly.
So it's really good to talk to you again, Daniel. Thank you very much for your willingness to talk to us for so long, and I'm really glad you're back with us, and I hope we can do this more or less on a weekly basis as you're able. Thank you very much for being with us again.
Thanks so much, Jay. It's great to be back again.